Good mornings, Honorable Minister, Honorable Member NITI Aayog, and dear friends. Welcome to this first conference of Indo-Nepal Academic Interaction, jointly organized by Kathmandu University and Foundation for Economic Growth and Welfare. I must share at the outset the origin of this conference. The thought of intellectual cooperation and regional growth is something which has been motivating us for the last 20 years. As you know, in football or in cricket or any team sports, it is the team which goes up and it is the team which succeeds. In real life, we have seen Europe before the formation of Euro and Europe of today. We are all familiar with the strength of America and of North America. I was myself a witness to a very intense debate at Harvard in September 2003 between Larry Summers, president of Harvard, and Trichet, president of ECB. It was actually a debate of dollar versus euro. 1999, euro did come into existence after a long chat and interaction. But by 2002, it had taken shape. The debate took place in Harvard in a crowded hall in 2003. Nobody could believe a diverse continent like Euro could survive with a single currency. Larry challenged it. Trichet defended it. It was much later, in 2010, when I was working at the IMF. The same debate happened. The story of Greece is known to all. And they said Euro will disintegrate now. And I remember Madame Lagarde saying, look, you are talking of Euro disintegrating, Euro will grow strength to strength. That is what a team is, and that is how teams operate, even in countries. The other aspect I want to share with you is, while I was doing my postdoctorate at Harvard, and our chair of the session today, Dr. Virmani, has done his PhD at Harvard, we both were familiar with the strength of National Bureau of Economic Research. How National Bureau of Economic Research influences thinking across the planet. The research papers, NBR working papers, as they are called, very, very influential. NBR has also twice a year educational programs done in collaboration with MIT and Harvard University. All the professors in America come to those winter and summer courses, and the whole American Economic Brotherhood, they teach the same thing. Whatever university or college, that's why the American Economic Brotherhood, the standard of it improves tremendously. We knew about that National Bureau of Economic Research, and we were thinking we can set up a think tank in India, which can then work not only for India, but for the region, like North America, like Euro. And that is the objective with which we set up the think tank on 31st October 2018. We have done a number of activities. Most importantly, we have already hosted 3 Nobel laureates. We are going to host 2 more, one in February, one in March. And we have discussed at length contemporary economic issues, not only domestic but global. We have done more than 250 webinars with 125 only with foreigners and 125 with Indians. The purpose was simple. We wanted to bring in a blend of research which is relevant for us. Most importantly, we are of the belief America research leads the world, but then maybe that research is not relevant for us. We need research which is more grounded to the circumstances where we live, rather than experimenting with models and theories minted there. Should it not be possible to have our own theories and have our own empirical experiences and learn from each other? So we discussed this with Ambassador Puri, who in turn discussed with Professor Wagle, and today here we are. We were blessed in this effort by Embassy of Nepal. We interacted with them too, and we decided we need to have something together because these two countries are so close to each other. Our cultural values are the same. So much so, the interaction, not only at official level, but even at the family level, are intense. And why not? We sit together, think of doing research together, planning together, and therefore learning from each other. Because of these many issues, my own global travels have endeared me to Nepalis in University of New South Wales when I first started interacting with them, and then at Washington, D.C. with the Nepal office. My own visit to Kathmandu in 2010 only strengthened the belief of great common heritage, and that is why we went around and wanted to start this series on Indo-Nepal Economic Consideration. Today, one-day conference is a beginning of that journey, and I welcome you to this historic journey which we want to undertake as a country and as an academic fraternity, where we common academicians are making an attempt to strengthen our academic ties together, where we can do joint studies together. We would like to do lots of research together. I'm going to share two very quick anecdotes and then move on to welcoming the Honorable Minister to India. The first anecdote I want to share with you, in 1991, we had the biggest crisis that India could have thought of. We all know about it, and we have all done our studies on it. Dr. Virmani was in the government at that time, and in his presentation, probably he'll cover that. Dr. Rangarajan and Dr. Y.V. Reddy at that time came out with the rule on foreign exchange reserves. The rule that they came out with in 93 from the high-level committee on balance of payments was a country should keep at least 1 year of international reserves. That wisdom was never taken to the rest of the world. IMF teams, World Bank teams, they come and visit us. And then what happened? Because that wisdom was not taken far and wide, the Asian crisis happened. 4 countries absolutely went down the drain. That is the time when again Rangarajan Reddy rule should have been told to the world. It didn't happen again. It's only in 1999 when the Argentinian crisis took place. And then the Greenspan-Gooditi rule, Gooditi being the foreign minister of Argentina, then the Greenspan-Gooditi rule was minted. And what was it? After 4 countries had suffered in Asia, and after India had done lots of manthan and come out with the international reserve rule, same rule, countries should keep 1 year of international reserves. That is why we feel that there is so much of need of doing research in our own continent, in our neighborhood, knowing from each other, learning, and then sharing with each other. With this brief welcome, I would now like to formally welcome Dr. Rana, Honorable Minister from Nepal. She has traveled to Delhi to bless us with her gracious presence. As we all know, she is the Foreign Minister of Nepal. Previously, she was the chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on Agriculture, Cooperatives and Natural Resources. She is also a member of House of Representatives. Dr. Rana was a member of the Constitution Drafting Committee of Nepal and served as coordinator of the Women's Parliamentarians Coordination Committee. She has also served as an elected regional councillor for South and East Asia for IUCN for 2 terms, 2008 to 16 in total. Board member of the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education on Peace and Sustainable Development, and as governing board member of Poverty Alleviation Fund, Nepal, from 2007 to 2011. She was the first elected women president of the Management Association of Nepal for 2 years, from 2002 to 2006. She has also successfully served as the chairperson and board member of White Ribbon Alliance for Safe Motherhood, elected for the term 2010 to 2014. The most important thing for us is she was educated in India in Chandigarh. So we are really proud that she took time to be with us here today. As you would have noticed, the contents of the conference today are based on deliberations, which I mentioned over how we really came to this conclusion. And the inaugural session, which is being chaired by Dr. Arvind Virmani, member of NITI Aayog, is a little longish session. The reason is we want to set the tone not only for the day today, but we want to have this collaborative relationship over many years to come. So we invited Dr. Arvind Virmani to speak to us on Viksit Bharat in detail, the journey that we have done. And we are very fortunate that Dr. Arvind Virmani, who started his career at the World Bank, came back to India in mid-80s, worked at the Planning Commission for many years, and then was the chief economic advisor of our own country. He was then appointed as executive director at the International Monetary Fund in Washington. That's where I interacted with him extensively, and that is how the think tank took its shape. Dr. Arvind Virmani later on was appointed as member of NITI Aayog. Because he has traveled this journey together from the reforms of 1991 to the modern economic era, we thought that a detailed discussion from Dr. Virmani would be really useful in setting the tone for us. The scholarly and rigorous presentation would help frame the thought of scholars, policymakers, and academicians on future research agenda. So once again, let me welcome the Honorable Foreign Affairs Minister of Nepal. Welcome, Honorable Minister, to India and to our conference to bless us. We feel so privileged. Before I hand over the mic to Dr. Virmani for chairing the session, in our traditional way, we would like to welcome the Honorable Minister. We would like Dr. Virmani to present a shawl to the Minister. With this, Dr. Virmani chairs the session now, and the context will be set by Dr. Ashok Vishandass and Professor from Kathmandu University, Professor Wagle. Over to you, sir.
Former chairman of CACP and a director of Egrow Foundation. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And without giving a kind of introduction to the dignitaries in this room, because everybody knows each other, so I wouldn't say. But as a former permanent secretary to Government of India, I owe a duty to say a few words about the dignitaries on the dais. Of course, those who have been covered by Professor Charan Singh is fine. There we have among us very galaxy of the people around us. The Nepal's ambassador to India, the Chardi affairs, then for ambassador of Bhutan to India, and many others, the Director General and Vice Chancellor of IIFT and many other. I'm not going to, but everybody knows. So let me quickly set the tone. What is the purpose? The regional economic integration is a vital driver of sustainable growth, particularly in South Asia, a region characterized by vast demographic diversity, economic potential, and shared challenges. Egrow Foundation, in collaboration with think tanks in the countries in the region, endeavors to share the development experience among them. This conference seeks to analyze Indo-Nepal bilateral relation, focusing on economic growth, trade, tourism, investment, and cultural connectivity. Nepal and India share an unparalleled historical, cultural, and economic bond. However, evolving geopolitical and economic dynamics necessitate a persistent academic dialogue to assess opportunity for collaborative development and integration. The main objectives of this conference include India has embarked upon a very important journey to become developed nation by 2047. This is well known. What is less known is this India seeks to showcase India's model of economic growth, Viksit Bharat and Sashakt Bharat, fostering regional cooperation to boost both growth and development, encouraging collaborative scholarly research, strengthening relation among the country in the region. And the academic rationale for organizing this conference are the South Asian region, home to nearly 1/4 of the global population, remains underexplored in academic research on regional cooperation. Indo-Nepal relations provide a macrocosm for studying broader themes of economic interdependence, policy harmonization, and cultural integration. This conference will address critical gaps in the academic literature while fostering interdisciplinary scholarship in the region. The key discussion theme of today's conference will revolve around regional cooperation, which includes theoretical frameworks for regional economic integration, empirical analysis of existing Indo-Nepal collaborative projects such as infrastructure and energy, challenges in fostering multilateral partnership within Asia, and second is the bilateral trade and investment, trade complementarity between Nepal and India, sectoral opportunity in technology, renewable energy, and infrastructure, case study of successful Indo-Nepal ventures and lesson for future collaboration. And third theme will be Indo-Nepal tourism, role of cultural and religious tourism in strengthening bilateral ties, infrastructure and policy needs to boost sustainable tourism, comparative analysis of tourism-driven growth in other bilateral contexts, and fourth and the last will be India's growth experience, economic liberalization and its lesson for Nepal, and policy framework for fostering entrepreneurial ecosystem, the role of youth and technology in shaping regional future. What we expect out of the conference? The expected outcome would include actionable recommendation to strengthen Indo-Nepal relation. This conference will contribute to the academic discourse on regional integration and economic diplomacy by fostering dialogue and producing empirically grounded insights. It aims to influence both scholarship and policy, thereby advancing the shared goal of sustainable and inclusive growth in South Asia. This session also seeks to analyze the focus on contours of Viksit Bharat. Economic growth is a necessary condition but not sufficient to become Viksit Bharat, or for that matter any country to become developed. Antyodaya welfare, just an example, is a Bharatiya welfare state focus on lowest rungs of the society. The provision of free food grain, just an example, to over 800 million people of the country is an example. A lot of untapped potential does exist to accomplish more by deepening bilateral bonds, creating policy templates and roadmaps usable at state level. And that would take us to a win-win position where our country would have stability with sustainability and growth with a green approach. Government becomes more effective when they collaborate with neighbors. That's my personal belief, and that has also empirical evidence. I hope and believe that a large set of feasible, positive sum action to expand the size of the pie would emerge at the end of this conference. With these few words, may I request, sir, to...
Thank you. Let me now turn to Dr. Wagle, Registrar, Kathmandu University.
Thank you, Chair. Honorable Minister, Ambassadors, Excellencies, Vice Chancellors, Professors, and friends from media, my colleagues from Kathmandu University. Thank you for the opportunity. Since we are discussing in very informal tone, let me compliment what Professor Charan Singh and Vishandass said about the background of how we arrived here. Is when Professor Puri was ambassador, he is on the way, he texted me. We had a one-to-one discussion, a lot of time, what can we do in academic lines, setting up a Nepal study center in some of the Indian universities or vice versa in Nepal. But when he was there, it did not materialize. But he did not stop pursuing that, and probably Professor Singh, Ambassador Puri, and myself had 3 or 4 continuous discussions in different intervals of time, and we have arrived here. So I would like to thank you for persistence and continuation of the process. If we had abandoned that, we would not probably have arrived here. I have informally heard what this kind of mechanism serves for in the interest of 2 countries. I think there are 2 very critical aspects of it. One, the perception of the policymakers sitting in Delhi about Kathmandu is completely different than the ground reality. It also applies for the policymakers sitting in Kathmandu being here. So, because we have largely believed in a lot of unfounded reports, hearsays, in many of the things, that is creating a lot of misconception at times, and only way we can counter those sort of things is as Professor Singh rightly has said, is through the empirical evidences, through well-grounded research, well-grounded publications, where the policymakers can also look at, the decision-making politicians can also look at. That is the main objective of it. That only will make our relationship sustainable, mutually respectful. We very often talk about the track to diplomacy. At times we feel a great urgency of it, but for that we are probably depending on our historical age-old relationship, assuming that we'll never counter any kind of differences or problems. But that has not been the case. It is not likely to be. The closest we are, more we are likely to have jostling our elbows. So the importance of track to diplomacy can only be established if we have got academic type of research, data to supplement it, and anybody can trust it. I think through this endeavor, this is just the beginning. The people now we are in this table may not be there tomorrow, but this is a process. This is this may be a very small beginning, and we are grateful that Honorable Minister has agreed to be here. And of course, the very high-level policy-making, the representation of our high-level policy-making bodies from India is also equally important to take this process forward. Let me not take very long time, but I want to touch another 2 things. One, we have talked a lot about the commonalities. We have talked about the commonalities in culture, talked about the long history, but there is also a perception that the economic kind of unilateral support a large economy like India is giving to Nepal. But if you look into the data, there is a huge amount of interdependence in economies. For example, Nepal is India's only trade partner in the world that has got 10:1 export-import ratio. India is capable of exporting, if exporting for 10 rupees, it is importing from Nepal only 1 rupees equivalent. That's one example I am giving about. We talk a lot about remittance inflow in Nepal, but the remittance re-remitted to India by the Indian workers is about 40% of the what remittance we receive in Nepal. That is about $4 million equivalent. That range from the workers, the semi-skilled workers in masonry, carpentry, the artisan work, the hairdressing, to very high-end work. If you look at any big company in India, in Nepal, the manager or the the chief of accounts or the strategic manager, you're likely to find in India. So this is nothing to complain about. It is the kind of complementarity we are sharing, and we should appreciate that. Same is talking about Kathmandu University. Of course, India has been a big source of intellectual inputs. There was a time when all our politicians and bureaucrats were educated in India. But Kathmandu University alone, over the period of last 25 years, has graduated 12% of the total graduates of Kathmandu University. They are Indian students, mainly in medical education. So, given the climate, it's been very attractive hub for Indian students. It can be. So these are the side of complementarities I just mentioned about. Along with that, there are some other complementarities, other good things we have started is the power trade agreement, tripartite power trade agreement between Nepal, India, and Bangladesh. Of course, trade it is there. We are in the same cheek of the Himalayas, sharing the common river systems. The next crisis the world would be probably facing is the water crisis, but we are in the same hydrological cycle and the water system. So there are complementarities. Finally, let me talk about something about the common challenges, whether we like it or not. It does not matter where politicians agree or not. We are facing the same fate. Yesterday, I have retweeted one of the tweets done by a very senior journalist of Nepal, who that would be the wrong word, who generally is very critical of Honorable Minister, but her statement in Climate Summit that we cannot be victim of the mistakes done by the others. And he has tweeted, it's such a bold statement the international fora probably made by a Nepali minister. So that is where we stand. The naked Himalayas, we are being probably very bullish about the hydropower development, but what if all the glaciers dry out tomorrow? That is not only the problem of Nepal, it is the entire 1.2 billion population in this subcontinent will suffer. Our aquifers, our rivers might be dying. Another, I think, the digitization. We have started about the payment gateways and other things, but we probably need to collaborate in a great way in digitization. That may contribute, the expanded digitization might also help to address our climate crisis, but we should now be clear that the developed countries are not going to pay any reparation or loss and damage to the developing countries. That is shown by the failure in Baku and the recent failure in plastic reduction of plastic agreement in Busan in Korea. So when we talk about the green, sustainable growth, the South Asia needs to have its different strategy. Not being very optimistic about the helicopter money or windfall gain from the developed countries. They have their own priorities. I have always been a very harsh argument continuously in Baku and last week in Germany. They are not going to switch off their air conditioner, not reduce the number of cars they are owning. They are not going to not going to sacrifice any luxury. That means the global warming and climate crisis is not going to go. Therefore, there are some hoaxes. One big hoax is the carbon credit and carbon sale. That is giving license to the developed countries to continue to pollute at their terms. Why their terms? The carbon calculation is done in their formula. The rate is fixed by them. And this year, Nepal is happy for getting 1 billion rupees equivalent from carbon trade. But if you look at that, is against the maybe $1 trillion of manufacturing that cause pollution in the global developed industrialized world. So that we should get rid of that hoax, and we need to have our own plan, own regional plan, depending on our glacier ecosystem. And the third, I think, is the movement out migration of our youth along with the capital. It is also the problem of India. India is a big population. It might not have felt it. We have felt it. Finally, not taking much time beyond this, the collaboration the Kathmandu University sought to do with Egrow for two reasons. One, we see the impact of Egrow already in India's economic policy making, be that Vision 2047, or the day I was having dinner with Professor Singh was the eve of the budget day, and the way they were in demand in contribute to Indian national budget. I could feel that. Second, their determination to do research, and Kathmandu University as Nepal's #1 ranked university officially by any other ranking, international ranking institution. We are much more focused on research. The future lies on the evidence-based policy making. That is only could be supported by a meaningful research. Ambassador Puri was here. Before he arrived, I mentioned about our informal concern when you are your ambassador in setting up Nepal study center somewhere possible in India or vice versa. Thank you, Professor Singh, Ambassador Puri, and all of you being here on behalf of the Kathmandu University. In particular, I would like to thank Honorable Minister in my one request when I communicated when the thoughts were still rudimentary. She accepted. That is the trust on us. This is a big encouragement for us. Thank you everyone. Thank you, Honorable Minister, and thank you, Dr. Virmani, for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Hello. Yeah. Let me. The background has been set by Dr. Charan Singh, Dr. Vishandass, and Dr. Wagle. So before getting into a long presentation, may I request Her Excellency Dr. Rana Deuba to set the direction and stage and give her guidance for the conference.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair of this session, Dr. Arvind Virmani, Member of NITI Aayog of India, Dr. Charan Singh, CEO, Egrow Foundation, Dr. Ashok Vishandass, former Chair, Commission for Agriculture, Cost and Prices, Professor Achyut Wagle, Registrar, Kathmandu University, all the ambassadors here, distinguished scholars, delegates and friends. I feel truly honored to be invited to speak to this distinguished audience at the Indo-Nepal Economic Conference. I thank the organizers, especially Kathmandu University and Nepal Center for Contemporary Studies and Egrow Foundation for inviting me to share my thoughts on the subject. And I've been a politician for the last 15-20 years. So it's been a while since I've been having to really make my brains work a little bit. So I've been looking at this and trying to work on this for the last 2-3 days. The Regional Synergy for Sustainable Development conferences focus on Nepal-India relations is very pertinent, as we heard from the speakers who spoke before me. The deep engagements between our nations are multifaceted, productive, and serve as a vital part of regional cooperation initiatives in South Asia as a whole. Dear delegates and friends, let me start by reiterating Right Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi ji's statement about India-Nepal relations at Nepal's Constituent Assembly on 3rd August 2014. I quote, हमारे संबंध कागज की कश्तियों से आगे नहीं बढ़े हैं, हमारे संबंध दिलों की दास्तान कहते हैं. Indeed, our relations are built on the bonding of hearts and shared social, cultural, and heritage values. Social, cultural values, and heritage. I believe India and Nepal are amongst the nearest and dearest of neighbors in the world today. Our shared geography forms all that is south of Himalayas, and our bond is underlined by broad cultural unity and economic complementarities, as we also just heard from the previous speaker. Rivers that flow wholly from Nepal's mountains are a source of life to all our friends and families living on the Indian plains, whilst the clouds that form above the Bay of Bengal are the source of snow and rain in Nepal. India is our largest trading partner, significant contributor in foreign direct investment, and a transit country for our international trade and connectivity. We feel that the people of India have always been on the side of the Nepalese people in our tryst with democracy. India's dedicated support in education, health, infrastructure development, institution building, and industrialization of Nepal further consolidates and deepens this bond. Multifaceted family ties, religious pilgrimages, and cultural festivities have kept us close for generations, while in the recent years, substantive progress has been made in expanding and deepening bilateral economic cooperation through formal channels. There has been good progress in organizing regular meetings of bilateral mechanisms to implement important past agreements and to chart out a longer term vision that seeks the mutual benefit of both our nations. And I'm so happy that we are going to be starting a forum like this where many things that cannot be openly discussed or cannot be easily discussed in formal channels can be thought through in closed door meetings, in situations like the one that we are now trying to create. It is important to note that major cross-border infrastructure projects such as the integrated checkposts, rail linkages, petroleum product pipelines, power transmission lines, roads, and motorable bridges have been built via this formalized economic cooperation. Most recently, never before seen progress was made in cross-border electricity trade between the two countries. The starting point of this initiative was the groundbreaking agreement that was reached between Prime Minister Shri Modi ji of India and former Prime Minister Shri Deuba ji of Nepal during the latter state visit to India in April of 2022 as Prime Minister. Envisioning the export of power equivalent to 10,000 megawatts from Nepal to India within a framework of 10 years was the key point of this agreement. Amongst the groundbreaking agreements reached at that juncture in the power sector were joint development of power generation projects in Nepal, development of cross-border transmission infrastructure, bidirectional power trade with appropriate access to electricity markets in both countries based on mutual benefits, market demand, and applicable domestic regulations of each country, coordinated operation of national grids, and institutional cooperation in sharing latest operational information, technology, and know-how. This agreement serves as a strong region for hydropower developers from India to view Nepal's energy market as one worth investing in. Moreover, the very recent signing of a historical tripartite power sales agreement has enabled Nepal to sell 40 megawatts of power to Bangladesh via the Indian grid. We highly appreciate the leadership in India creating the environment for this breakthrough. With a view to further advancing economic cooperation, the promotion of trade between the two countries is also a top priority. However, it is a matter of concern that the trade between Nepal and India is very asymmetric. For every rupee of goods and services exported to India, Nepal imports 10 rupees worth of goods and services. Consequently, the widening trade deficit that India alone has reached almost 1/6 of Nepal's gross domestic output. The issues over sustainability of Nepal's trade deficient needs to be seriously addressed. Thus, I hope the deliberations at this forum will discuss innovative ways for collaboration to support the expansion and diversification of Nepal's trade to India to ensure sustainability and economic cooperation on a more equal footing. And here, of course, we are hoping that there will be import of foreign investment as well as technology, which we can jointly develop and re-export back to India, along with the partnership of the citizens of India itself. Collaboration in sectors of information technology, the gig economy with software development should serve as a boon for the talented youth of Nepal, as well as a market for the Indian IT sector. Many infrastructural, regulatory, and administrative barriers, as well as procedural irritants, otherwise known as red tape, lead to excessive delays, high costs, and uncertainties. These impede the opportunity to realize a higher potential. And a lot of discussion around this is also required, both on the side of Nepal and on the side of India, because while I was serving on the Committee of Agriculture, Cooperative and Natural Resources, I realized that there are issues on both the sides, and when we have formal government level meetings, it is very brief and all the issues are not really worked at in depth. And maybe this can be such a forum that we look at each and every of the many products which we share between neighbors, and how that can be synergized, and how we can do better export and import and better trade of technology from both sides. In this context, addressing preferential erosion vis-a-vis other least developed countries, removing non-tariff barriers, and facilitating trade at the border, concluding mutual recognition agreements, leadership for policy in new sectors, promoting regional value chains and intra-industry trade, upgrading trade-related infrastructure, including road and railway infrastructure, and India's support in strengthening productive capacity would go a long way in balancing trade and in making our economic integration and cooperation even stronger. Dear delegates and friends, I'm delighted to share with you that Fitch Ratings has awarded Nepal a BB minus rating for its investment climate, positioning Nepal second behind India in South Asia. We have opened almost every sector of the economy to foreign investment. Recently, we have reformed policies and enacted many legislatures to augment the investment climate. Statutory provisions pertaining to land acquisition, company registration, environmental assessment, and infrastructure development have been relaxed and simplified. We are ready to establish bilateral investment agreements with as many prospective countries as possible. And here too, as a foreign minister, I have come across many other third countries who are very interested in investing in Nepal. But I know very truthfully and as a Nepali that we don't have the magnitude of technology, capital, or management skills, and we cannot do it alone. The potential is there. So if people from the Indian private sector, from the academic sector, partner with Nepal, I think we can accomplish much more in this field as well. Nepal offers an attractive incentive package in terms of corporate taxation, import duties, and export facilitation. We guarantee full repatriation of income from investment, and Nepalese legislation prohibits nationalization of private enterprises. This is written in our constitution. Further, Nepal is committed to policy stabilization to encourage FDI and private sector engagement. India is already the largest investor in Nepal, with about 2/5 of the total stock of foreign investment. We encourage the Indian private sector and entrepreneurs to take advantage of the readily available investment opportunities in Nepal. I invite you to invest in Nepal in hydroelectricity, both in generation and transmission, transport infrastructure such as fast-track roads, railways, cable cars, metro rails, flyovers, and international airports, agriculture, food processing, herb processing, tourism, sports, mineral-based and production industries, and information and communication technology. So all these fields in Nepal are relatively still virgin fields. But if we can have a good policy framework and a good discussion around each of this sector, I'm sure our economic growth together could go a long way. I'm confident there is a potential high rate of return on investment in all these sectors. At this juncture, I would like to take a few minutes to focus on tourism in Nepal. We can jointly promote our religious and cultural treasures as tourism destinations, which would contribute substantially to regional prosperity. Nepal and India should effectively promote the joint initiatives like the Ramayana circuit and the Buddhist circuit to harness mutual benefit. I'm happy to note that a number of India based hotel chains have already come to Nepal, and there is encouraging progress in cross border digital transactions between India and Nepal. We look forward to the effective management of inter-country hotel networks and digital payment systems for the convenience of tourists, business people, students, pilgrims, and travelers of both countries. I would also like to share that Nepal has opened up two international airports at Lumbini and Pokhara, two of Nepal's most beautiful, unique, and spiritual places. We have constructed these airports at very high cost and seek the support of our closest friend and neighbor to help make them fully operational. Thus, we seek the support of private Indian airline operators to start services to these two airports for enhancing not only economic ties but also deepening people to people connections between our two countries. And since there is some history with these two projects, I sincerely would like to open this floor to please have a discussion on what would be the implications of Indian Airlines flying to these airports and how it would actually deepen our relations and our people-to-people contact. But I think there has to be some clearance at the highest level in India before these two airports can be accessed by Indian Airlines. The government of Nepal has offered various incentives to airline companies for such services, and now a number of airlines from the Middle East and from China and from Thailand are coming to at least Lumbini Airport. But there's a number of incentives that the government of Nepal has given. The government of Nepal has also been seeking additional air routes via India, which would highly benefit tourism as well as connectivity. And I think this is also an issue which needs a lot of discussion before coming to a good conclusion. Dear delegates and friends, Nepal has achieved a historic political transformation and institutionalized peace and a democratic system of governance in the country. Now, our priority is to secure rapid social economic growth to bring peace and prosperity to our people. Nepal is graduating from its LDC status by 2026 and hopes to become a middle income country in the near future. Continued support and goodwill from the international community, particularly from our closest neighbors, remain important for meaningful, sustainable, and irreversible graduation. We are working hard to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. However, the vagaries of climate change, which transcend national boundaries, present a most severe threat to achieving SDGs. Only in the most recent monsoon season, Nepal lost infrastructure worth $1.3 billion due to unprecedented floods. Given the shared geography and the shared river systems, Nepal and India must strengthen cooperation on climate change issues and work towards a more sustainable and resilient future. Dear friends and delegates, Nepal is excited by India's rapid economic process and its rise as an extremely important international power. Currently, India is the world's fifth largest economy and is on track to become the third largest economy in the world after US and China by the year 2030. It is irrefutable that the global economy's center of gravity is moving towards Asia, and the center of gravity is located nowhere else than in the neighborhood of Nepal. And the undertaking to integrate the region for regional prosperity as a whole is what we must march towards. Because our region has immense potential, closer cooperation among the countries in South Asia will undoubtedly create a strong regional synergy for a more resilient, prosperous, and sustainable region. There is thus a need to further strengthen regional and sub-regional platforms such as BIMSTEC, BBN, and SAARC to forge economic integration and complement bilateral economic engagements, and to have think tank bodies like this, I think is now very, very crucial, and I also think it's very timely that we are entering into these dialogues, and I'm so happy that it is now starting with India and Nepal, but maybe the other countries in the region can also join in where and as possible. Finally, I would like to emphasize that with Nepal being a priority under India's neighborhood first policy, strengthening the economic relationship based on shared concern and shared prosperity holds immense significance and potential for both countries. An economically prosperous, politically stable, and democratic Nepal is what we endeavor to be, and we are getting closer to this goal if we look at a historic perspective. And with fruitful cooperation with a neighbor such as India, prosperity is very realizable, we feel. For this, we need to develop a framework for a comprehensive economic partnership that links the industrial development of Nepal with the growth structure of India. We also need to work together to develop a common position in international forums based on bilateral concern such as human security, terrorism, human rights, artificial intelligence, the multilateral trading system, and emerging challenges to the globally accepted development paradigm. I hope the deliberations during this conference would be fruitful in generating new insights for further expanding Nepal-India economic interlinkages as well as regional integration. I wish this event a great success. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Dr. Rana, for a very comprehensive review of India-Nepal economic issues and relations, and your guidance for this forum and for future research. Honorable professors, delegates, let me start on a personal note before I go to my presentation. I think the primary objective of my being here was to make the presentation, but I'm very happy to have been here through the talk of Honorable Foreign Minister here, because it did give me a good perspective. So, but I want to, before I go to my presentation, I'll start on a personal note and say a little bit on NITI. I have a long association with Nepal because my wife's best friend is from Nepal. So we hear about Nepal every time she visits Nepal, because either on the way in or on the way out, she makes it a point to stop and either stay with us or have a meal with us. And so does her husband, who happens to be an Indian. But also in NITI, about 6 months ago, I had the pleasure of meeting with a delegation of, I think, about 8 to 10 people from the Nepalese Planning Commission. And one of the questions they raised was about NITI versus Planning Commission. So I'll just start by saying a little bit on that before I go to. The old Planning Commission, which was abolished in 2014, was basically India's version of centralized planning. Now, you all know, I mean, especially those of you who are older, I just met somebody who's older than me, Professor Saab here, but the youngsters will not know. The USSR, the original centralized planning was the USSR, so we had our own version of it, where there were national plans, state plans, and a whole lot of money which was distributed for these. But it was all top down. That planning commission has been abolished in 2014, and we have something called NITI, which stands for National Institution for Transforming India. And in kind of as a academic or lifelong think tanker, I describe it in the following ways. So one is a change from this centralized system to a decentralized one. So there is no money, there is nobody saying this is the national plan, this must be your state plans, we approve this plan and you get this money. So that is no longer there. So it's decentralized. And second aspect is it's more policy oriented. You know, what are the changes we need to make things happen? So obviously make what happen is that there has to be some kind of a approach or vision. I mean, it's a simple, this is the word we use, a vision, okay, which is where, so there, we are more in the business of creating visions, of creating share information sharing, knowledge sharing, and those sort of things. I think Dr. Saab here also mentioned something which is relevant, issues of complementarity, the gaps, etc. Exactly the same kind of approach which is being suggested here, database policy research, etc., etc., which also Egrow is very keen on. So, and the reason is for this change was because the Prime Minister firmly believes that you cannot plan for 28 independent states. We have 21 states, which is one more than the members of the Economic Union, EU. So the concept of, and these are as independent, maybe not, they are not completely independent, but in economic matters, in many other matters, as per our constitution, they have complete rights over the so-called state list of the constitution. So that's kind of very important to remember both when we do the research and we try to draw lessons. But that is what motivated this change which the Prime Minister instituted. So that is why that leads me into what it says there. It says a vision of Viksit Bharat. So the PM really believes in a decentralized system, which he says, okay, the nation must have a vision, the states must have a vision, so there'll be 28 visions, and districts must have, blocks must have, every institution, if you are let's say doing R&D, you have your R&D vision for the future, okay, and so on. So it's really his approach, which is kind of a decentralization in thinking also, okay? It's not that we are the wise men sitting here and everything we are going to tell you. So with those preliminaries, let me go to my presentation, which is, as it says, a vision. So I am a NITI member, but this is not the vision of NITI, because there is no such thing. We don't have a centralized vision. So that is why I call it a vision. You can say that as a member of NITI sitting there, this is my vision, or whatever you want to look at it, but it is not, I'm not presenting specifically, let's say, the government's vision or anything. Okay, so with that introduction, let me start next. So what I'm going to talk about is really the future. So I think, Charan, because we don't have time to go to the past, there are questions of the current and past. Perhaps if we have time, we can take some questions. But my focus is on the future, which is the way we are thinking now about India in the future. So I will basically 3 or 4 major points. Before we think about big things for the future, we have to be clear, where are we? So my first part of my presentation in how are we positioned for this future. Then looking at the opportunities and challenges which are there. Opportunity, it turns out the global structure, how it's changing, etc., which may be of interest also to all of you who may not be that directly working on India, but this is going to affect every country in the world. So think of it from that perspective, that I'm looking at the various changes which are happening internationally will provide an opportunity for India. I mean, the implication for other countries you or the conference may consider. The challenges which are well known to many of us, but I think they are important for us only to be aware of. And finally, I'll give you a little picture of the projected where we believe we can and will reach. Next. So where do we stand? So I will go quickly over 4 or 5 issues. What has been happening to per capita growth, employment and wages, poverty and distribution. If you read newspapers, you'll hear a lot about this. But you can see this as an illustration of what very rightly Dr. Wagle said. We must have a data-based approach. You know, everybody can have an opinion, but first we have to say, what is the data? What is it showing us? Okay, and then we must analyze it and then develop whatever policy or views we have. So I was very impressed. You really focused on things the way I actually approach my work in NITI. Poverty and some social indicators, not enough time to cover everything, but I'll just give you an idea of how I kind of look at it and analyze these things. Next. So one key element, this is a plot of most of the data which I'm going to give you is taken from international sources. Whenever I compare, it's the WDI World Bank indicators. So in this I have 2 graphs. The blue one, the dots represent the difference between the rate of growth of India versus the average rate of growth of the world, taken from the WDI. And the red dots indicate India's growth relative to China. So India's growth minus China's growth. So let's focus on the top one first. The first thing you notice is that there is a lot of fluctuation. Okay, rates of growth fluctuate. And the point I want to make here is that when we are looking at the future, we are talking about 10 years from now, 2030, 2047 or 2050. As an academic, I find it easier to talk about 2050. Of course, the Indian government is focused on 2047 because it's 100 years of India. But when we are looking at such long term, this 1 or 2 years really does not matter. Because you can never have such a precise forecast. So what does it show? What it shows is that India's rate of growth, that trend line, the rate of growth has been expanding relative to the world. Okay, so that's the first picture you have. And then the second one, relative to China, which is in the negative territory, i.e. China's growth, as all of you know, was higher than ours. So India minus China is below, right? Below the 0 line. So the gap increased for a while till around the mid-90s, and now it has closed. It has been closing since then, and now we are in positive territory. So both these trends I expect to continue. Okay, this is not just today. This is not quarterly growth. This is not 3 years. This is the broad trend from roughly the 1980s. Next. So to fix your mind on some numbers, I'll just point to 2. You know, I've got the columns there, per capita growth, GDP growth. Why per capita? Because as a forecaster who's been in this business for like half a century, I always focus on per capita because the GDP is just a multiplication of per capita and population, and we have no control over population as such, by and large, you know, when we are talking in this context. So I give both, but I'll just read out the GDP ones. But there are 2, if you look above the line, one interesting thing which comes out in the fluctuations is the growth rate every 5-year average. These are the 5-year averages on top, 4.4, 4.0 for per capita, and similarly for GDP. And you can see every 5 years there's a change. There's a negative, positive, negative, positive. It's an amazing coincidence, if you want to call it. It's not actually. So that you know, happens every 5 years. Okay, but let's come to the 10-year averages, which are really relevant for the future. And what we see is that India's growth, GDP, if you look at it, has fluctuated in 10-year periods between 6.1 or 6.0 to 6.8. So the conclusion which can be drawn correspondingly, you can look at the per capita 10-year growth, that range is clearly feasible, you know, it's not something which is very difficult for India to do. So, something like, as I give some numbers, that 5.2 to 5.6 per capita and 5.7 to 6%. The first is very feasible over 25 years, and I would say when you go higher than that, maybe a little ambitious. Next. Now, when anybody talks about growth of GDP, they say, well, what about employment? Okay, you may be doing okay in growth, but you hear all kinds of stories of all problems of employment. So what's happening to employment? So the longest consistent series we have is something called ASI, which is the Annual Survey of Industries. So I use that to show you the red dots are the employment growth. Again, I'm looking at growth because I'm looking at the long term here and trying to get the trends. So employment growth is the red. The real wage growth, i.e. wage growth adjusted for inflation, is in the blue lines. And again, you see the same trends. The rate of growth of employment has been rising very gradually, and the rate of growth of increase of real wages in this formal sector. This is generally more or less what we call the formal sector, given all the data limitations, etc. So the rate of growth of employment and the rate of growth of wages is broadly consistent with what has been happening in GDP growth. Next. So, if we look at, we also have some short-term data now. I have given you the long-term trends, and basically that give us confidence that we can grow at certain rates. I mean, the exact rates are not important for this current purpose. But we also have detailed data, consistent data series called PLFS. Data is always a problem. Too many people, again, I come back to you, everybody can make all kinds of statements, but we must look at the actual data. Otherwise, you can say anything. So, and that's not good for economic. It's okay for politicians and political purposes, but if we are going to do economics, we must look at the data. So I commend you on that. I'm very happy that you're focused on that, and as Egrow has been since I was there, and I'm no longer there for the last 2 years. But so again, we have for the last 7 years a consistent data series where we can look at the growth of employment. And as you can see, I won't go into explanation. There are two measures of employment. Both of those are clearly trending up. The blue line and the red line. The wage data in this is a little problematic, but broad picture tells us that the fastest growth of real wages is actually in casual workers. So there is this myth which says that there is no jobs and people are being forced to go into casual work. Okay, but the fact that the fastest growth of wages, real wages, which is over there 2.8, but again the exact number does not matter. The point is it's strongly positive and more than for self-employed and regular workers. That has certain implications, but the basic point is that it's not a push factor, it's a pull. So both the rate of employment growth of casual labor and their real wages are rising, which means the demand for casual labor is rising faster than the supply. So it is not a push, it's a pull. I mean, those two data facts cannot be reconciled by saying they are being forced into it. They are being pulled into it. They are not enough people, okay, who there's a demand, but it's not being met, so wages are rising. Next. So then people say, but poverty has increased, there's all kinds of inequality, etc., etc. Okay, let's have a look with whatever data we have. I mean, what data you have in your mind, I don't know, which may be showing. I'm not disputing anybody, I'm just looking at whatever data I have. So this is the data we have now. It's a consistent series on NSS for 2 periods, 11 years apart. You can see at the top 2011-12, 2023. So 11 years. What has happened to poverty? We can now, the standard measure in poverty in India is consumption poverty. I have been involved in it for 50 years. Last, when I was principal advisor in Planning Commission, my division was responsible for making that. This is about 20 years ago, for making the poverty estimates. We've been using this for donkey's years, as they say. But I don't even take the Indian definition. I take the international definition. and which is the PPP, etc. Again, we need not go into technical details, but that shows consistently that the overall poverty rate has declined from around 12% to 12.3%. Okay, that's a big decline in poverty. There's another measure, all from World Bank. It used to be, I don't know, again, the older people may know, there used to be $1 poverty line, $2 poverty line, and $4. So the equivalent of that today is 1.9 here. The latest version is 2.18. It doesn't matter, because all you got to do is have a consistency to get the picture. Okay, the consistent numbers, whether you put it into 2017 prices or whatever, is not that important, but it must be consistent. So the other measure, the higher measure, which now in terms, when we are an upper middle income country, can be seen as the vulnerable population, you could say. And that also shows that it's gone down dramatically from about 54% to 22%. Okay, that's the second set of numbers. Okay, so people say, fine, poverty over this period has gone down, but what about the distribution? It's all getting bad. I know so many poor people. I go out, you see poor people. Okay, well, if you go out to San Francisco, you'll see poor people, but okay. Again, the point I'm making here is it has to be a consistent definition, and what is the change? Nobody's saying anything is perfect. So what does it show? With the standard measure we have used, for, I don't know, 100 years, is something called the Gini coefficient. And according to that, there is a clear improvement in the consumption distribution. Even the one which after that has become very popular, top 5% to bottom 5%, which is at the bottom of the table, has improved during this period. Next. So before I go to the next point, so the conclusion which I draw from it, that we are in a good place to make this big push to become a high-income country. We'll tell you how we define that and what needs to be done. So the second point has to do with opportunity. And the biggest opportunity is in demographics. And that immediately takes you to the issue of quality of basic education, etc., which I have investigated in detail, but I'll give you a hint or a flavor of that. The second big change in the world opportunity is supply chain de-risking. I called it high-tech decoupling and partial economic decoupling. Remember, this is the part which will apply to all countries, including Nepal, okay, and China or anybody else you can think of. So these are very important issues which affect India. I am going to give you an Indian perspective, but this is something you may want to note if you're working on Nepal or other countries also. So the supply chain de-risking, and I'll give you a little idea of what kind of risks there are. And this e-services. So services, what we call e-services, becoming very important. And here it is particularly important for India, but in some context, perhaps I have not studied it, but even for Nepal and India, some of these are the new things you were talking about, the digital, etc., which perhaps they will work on in future discussions. But it's important to note it now. And of course, as I said, I'm drawing implications for India because that's my job in NITI. And then this whole issue of skills. So this slogan called skill for India, skill for the world. In some ways, you could also have this kind of approach, right? You skill for Nepal, skill for the world, or whatever element which suits you. Next. Okay, so what is the demography? The last three columns there give you this table relates to country share of world's working age population, what we call. I take, it says there 20 to 59, various people take 19 to some, it doesn't matter, but the trends are again. Remember, my focus is on the trends. I'm thinking of 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So the trends are the key thing. And little bit of definition change doesn't really make that much difference. So what is happening? So in the first two columns, I have given you the change in the working age population of different countries in the last 30 years, and the next column, the next 30 years. Okay, so 30 years past, 30 years future, all data from world population statistics. I don't develop any of my statistics because otherwise we get bogged down into controversy about how you measure, etc. So you can see that in the past, most of the developed countries, USA, Western Europe, UK, Japan, South Korea, have had a decline in the working age population. Russia, okay, and even China and Thailand, but there were some countries like Indonesia, Mexico, Vietnam, and of course India, where the working age share of the working age world population was rising. So this I'm talking about international demographics and what impact it's going to have. But in future, not only all the countries which were earlier declining in working age, but also Indonesia, Mexico, and even Vietnam, their share is going to go down. The only country in this group, which is, I've picked these out because they are relevant for our future and future policy. India is the only one which will have a modest increase. So that's the only country. Now that has huge implications for how the division of labor in the world, what we call comparative advantage, will be affected. So in my way of thinking about it, and this is the last point on the left, the comparative advantage, the write-up if you see, will shift in India. So the human resources, the low skill, medium skill, high skill, everything is important. We often tend to focus only on the high skill. I noticed, I think perhaps an honorable minister's speech where the medium skill, no, perhaps, yeah, but there was one of the points made was about medium skills. I think they are very, very important. We neglect them. We look down on them, but they are the ones which promote real wages of the public. Me and my children are always interested in the high skill, but the medium skill is what is going to drive the middle class, the middle income, etc. So I pay a lot more emphasis to that. So basic point here is these demographic changes and combined with this anti-immigration sentiment. Remember, this working age population is declining, so countries were getting immigrants. But now there is a huge anti-immigrant sentiment, okay? And that is going to affect what happens to all of us, okay? So there is an opportunity for e-services, okay? That's the thing. Many of the services will get unbundled, and what can be done, let's say from India, Nepal, wherever, can be done. But of course, it doesn't happen by itself. We have to make sure it happens, okay? Next. So this is more India specific, but one of the, there's been a lot of debate in India about whether we should have FTAs, join RCEP or and so on, look east type of, not look east, we are looking east of course, but whether FTAs with the ASEAN, we actually already have a FTA with ASEAN, we have an FTA with Japan, with South Korea, we don't have FTAs with the Western countries. And still we keep talking about whether we should join RCEP, which is only difference is China is there. And all the others we already have an FTA. So what I wanted to demonstrate here is that there is a misperception in my view, okay, that of the importance of China versus the Western countries. In my view, so what I've given you is some data on US, EU, Japan, UK, and ROK, Korea. These are the same countries, remember, where I gave you the demographics, okay? The demographics is going to drive the comparative advantage and the trade, okay? That's why I'm presenting these. So what is the implication of, I've given some table, let me read out some of the important things which come out. These 5 countries or economies are the source of 60% of global FDI, okay? That is 7 times that of China. They import 53% of world manufactured imports, which is 5 times that of China. So if we look at it from India's perspective and we want to grow manufacturing, it's obvious what is more important. The FTA with the US, EU, Japan and ROK we already have. So UK, US, EU is much more important if we want to grow manufacturers, because you cannot grow manufacturers without exports, okay? It's never happened. In recent history. And even Japan, UK and Korea constitute as large a market for foreign manufactured goods as China. They don't import, okay? So it has no benefit for us. If they don't import, we have to export. If you want to build scale, you have to have a domestic market and exports. Again, to some extent, these are relevant for Nepal also, but that was not my object here, but the others can draw the implication. So the bottom line for us is we need those FTAs with US, EU, UK I don't know whether I've given an example later. Perhaps go to the next one. No, that's different. But let me give it here before I forget. The Vietnam's FTA with EU immediately gives them a 12.5% advantage over us. So people say, they are much better infrastructure, etc. No, till 10 years ago they had a much worse infrastructure. That 12.5% matters a lot. Next. Okay, so again, some broad picture which may be useful in many other contexts. To give you an idea of how I look at globalization, deglobalization, etc. The graph on the left is the ratio of world merchandise exports to world GDP. And you can see that the first peak, that is 2008, that's a global financial crisis. Okay, so there was a huge period of increase from early 2000s or maybe even earlier, where this ratio increased tremendously. Okay, the result was there was one country which saw this and benefited from it. You can guess, but it's the red one on the right. So China utilized this, and that's fair enough. They utilized this to become the largest exporter in the world. I wish I had a pointer, don't. But the two lines going down, green and blue, are the two largest exporters of merchandise, USA and Germany. So by 2008 or 2009, China had overtaken them in terms of world share of merchandise. But what is happening now? Go back to the left. It stopped. Okay, at the best, most optimistic, this globalization of trade has stopped. May even be declining in measured by this measure. Okay, so we cannot, when we talk about trade, we can't depend on the overall globalization. That's the key point here you must grasp. Again, it applies to everybody. Okay, that opportunity is gone, and there's one country which benefited the most from it. Okay, and that's the fact. It's not an assumption. Okay, so the second point here, if you look at it, that after that 2008, the global trade is going down, but China's share keeps going up and up. Frankly, as an economist, there's only one implication. It is not market driven. Okay, and China is a socialist market economy. I don't have time to give a lecture on, sometime I may give that in Egrow also, I have not given. So that has a lot of implication. Next. They are not a market economy, and the graph on manufactured exports is even more relevant. You see that the four largest exporters in the world were Japan, Germany and EU, and again this shows that their share of manufactured exports went over them by 2008. If that last dot above them all is actually 2007, okay, or 2008, 7 or 8. But they keep growing. Okay, it doesn't happen in market economies. Okay, so this is a big issue for us. Why? Next. So basically, the table on the left shows again goes a little deeper than the overall manufacturing and gives you China's share of various manufactured exports, and these are sorted by their share. So I'll start with the top and tell you something about the reds in the middle. So the top share is 67%, 2/3, let's say, in pottery. Now, pottery, you say, how does it matter? Well, guess who it matters to? A month ago, there was a story about Thailand. Pottery making is very important for the north of Thailand. And they were afraid that the pottery industry is in the process of being wiped out. Okay, this is 22 data. I wouldn't be surprised if the 25 data shows that this is not 67 but 75%. Okay, it's just systematically wiping out the export industries of other countries. This keeps growing, these numbers. What's the red one? So the basic thing is, we had an Anti-Monopolies Act. India had. US has an Antitrust Act. You say monopolies are bad. Okay, but this is the biggest monopoly the world has ever seen. Believe me, nobody else in the world has had such a high share of manufactured exports. Okay, so monopolies are a problem. Become competitive. The rest of the world will suffer if there is one person producing, one country producing everything in manufacturing. Okay, so competition is very important. So that's the challenge, how to introduce competition. The second one, the red elements, it is what I call 3C: communication, competition, and control. You will see that it includes what we call ADP, automatic data computers, okay, telecom equipment, and other types of professional equipment. So there the shares are 40%. And these have a special relevance for de-risking. You all heard of de-risking, which is going on. These elements are in everything, wherever there is communication, computation or control. Give you one example from US. I have actual examples from India, but I won't go into that. The example from the US is all the port infrastructure in the western seaports is imported from China. One day they discovered and woke up that all the data from this stuff was going to China. Okay, if the data is going, remember, communication, computation, control. Effectively, what they suddenly realize is they know everything which has happened on this port, and they can control it from there. So they can shut it down. Now they are scrambling to change this. Okay, how to replace all the Chinese equipment. This is happening everywhere. I just want to leave it with that. For Indians at least, Nepal may not be worried, but I am worried. Okay, about these matters. And this is much more if you go down. Okay, so the issue for industrial policy for India is how to. This may not be directly relevant to Nepal, but in terms of supply chains it may be, is how to work with, to combine India's manpower advantage, go back to the demographics, with advantage of USA in technology and EU in demand, to do this jointly. The joint is not anti anybody, it is to promote competition. One cannot have monopolies. If this happened in the US, the antitrust act in the US would have said dismantle them. Okay, but we can't do that. This is international, so we have to introduce competition. Next. So I'll leave this with a fact and move as a fact. So what I have here is I showed this because this shows where India is. See that bottom pink line. So we are far behind. The 5 big manufacturing nations are China, you can see, USA, Germany, Japan, and 5th is India. So that's the reason I've given this plot. The interesting fact is that India is the 5th largest producer of manufactured goods in terms of value added, but it is the 15th largest exporter. That is our problem, this gap in rank. Okay, again, I don't have time, but I just leave you with the thought, and one of the ways we are trying to address it next is that we miss the bus on FDI and MNCs, particularly when other countries in Southeast Asia use the entry of to build supply chain. That's the point of this. I won't go into details. This is what we are doing is kind of playing catch up. You all heard of Apple and mobile manufacturing. So this is a bus which South Korea, Malaysia, Thailand, China, and now Vietnam have all caught. So we are scrambling to catch up in a period, remember, where globalization is not happening. So it's a big challenge for us. But if supply chains develop, there is obviously possibilities for other countries, including Nepal, to become a part of those. Next. Okay, little bit of the challenges, and then I'll move on to the last point in conclusion. So the way, again, I look at various things. So this is a plot of total labor force participation and the male there. So the way I look at it is I take most of the countries, all the countries in the world which have the data, let's say, of total labor force participation rate, and plot them and put a trend line. And then I look at where India is relative to that line. Okay, so if you look at the pink line and the pink dots, I don't know whether you can see them, but our labor force participation is low relative to what it should be. I think it's very vague. I'm not sure you can see it, but let's leave it. So So what that tells me, and why is that? If we do the analysis, we find that the male labor force participation is very high. It actually is high, almost comparable or even higher than in developed countries. Okay, but the female labor force is very low. So I look at all these this challenge and others, I'll tell you, as an opportunity. What that means is if we can increase the female labor force participation, we'll get a huge boost in growth, in labor and growth. Okay, so challenge, opportunity. That will allow me to grow faster than I would have otherwise. Okay, so the good news is the share of females in rural employment and in manufacturing employment is rising in the last few years. Next. And then I do similar things for education, etc. Here I may be worth it because this again may be relevant for Nepal. Is if you look at the top line, blue, and that red dot on the left, right on top, below where it says India something. Okay, that shows that the primary completion rate is very high in India relative to our per capita GDP, and now equal to anything we would want to achieve. Okay, so we don't have a problem there. This will go on. The slight issue is the one below, where we look at something called minimum reading proficiency. So formally, you have a degree, okay, or something which says certificate, you've completed primary school, but only 40% of the children can actually read at the minimum level. Okay, this is not a unique Indian problem. So again, it may be relevant to Nepal. But fortunately, in the time we have this international data, India is a little bit above the line, but that's not a consolation. If we are going to become an upper middle income country in the next 7 years or 23 years, upper middle, we have to rapidly increase this quality. Okay, rapidly. Okay, so the next dot tells you where we have to be at least in the, this is the lower graph, and the second dot in the middle there. We have to be in, whenever we become, I'll tell you when I plan to become a upper middle and a high income country, right? So the point is this perspective which I use can be used by everybody to pace themselves. You know, what I've always objected to is arbitrary. You just pick out some country from somewhere which you think is the relevant person. I said, forget it. Let's have all the countries in the world, see where the line lies, and then compare that. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do better. Of course, if you can do better, you must. I mean, it's not that I want to be at 42. I would like to be at 100%, but that's not what the general reality is, right? So you have to be realistic also. Okay, so set realistic goals. So first you have to go to 50%, then 70%, whatever, right? So this process allows you to set realistic goals. Obviously, we would love to exceed them. Next. I just put this on the middle. I think I'm running out of time here. So this legacy of what I call bureaucratic socialism, again, this is something maybe relevant to Nepal, I don't know. Very relevant? Okay, this is a big challenge. I have some suggestions, I make them, I've written about it, but I'll just put them down here. One of the new ones which I have in my paper, by the way, there's a whole paper on this Viksit Bharat, which you can download from the NITI website, which goes into much more detail about all these issues which may be of interest. It has a 100-page paper. It has a table of contents, so any issue you're interested in, you can read about it. So with that, so the new is the what I call the use of AI and expert systems to run and simplify and analyze these. Next. So finally, where is it that we want to go? Okay. Now, every consultancy organization in the world has a forecast on something. So I want to be clear what I do, okay? Which may be completely different from others. You judge whether it's relevant or not, okay? So what I do is, the World Bank has a formal definition of lower middle, upper middle, etc. They have 4 designations, and they have a precise definition which they use. So what I do for all these projections is I say what is the most recent comparable country which went from, let's say, lower middle to upper middle, and from upper middle to higher income. Okay, that happens to be Indonesia in the first case in 2019, and Romania again in 2019. Okay, so I take the per capita GDP data for that country, the latest PPP, which is in 2017 international prices. Okay. This is the latest data which has just come out in July. Okay, so my earlier paper actually doesn't use this data and gives you different graphs from what I'm showing you. Okay, this is the latest data and it has some amazing things, but we'll leave that for the discussion. So then I use that, and all my projections are in this real, what I call real per capita GDP and real GDP, all related to PPP. Okay, all the growth rates we see, this is again an interesting economic fact. If you take the real income of a country internally and take the growth rate, or if you take the real PPP GDP income or of the country, those growth rates are exactly identical. Okay, so we no need to distinguish. If you have the proper real growth of the country, it will be exactly equal to the proper PPP growth rate. Okay, exactly. Okay, this you can see from all the data across the world. So what do? As I said, I take those benchmarks, translate them into PPP, apply the growth rate, and I'll show you what I do. And then say, okay, when we reach that, we become upper middle. When we reach that, we become high income. Then I use the OECD long-term projection, the IMF short-term projections, and the OECD long-term projections for every country in the world for which it's available. But for India, that OECD becomes the pessimistic forecast, if you will. Okay, so my projections take that as the lowest forecast for India. Next. So these are the three projections. You can see that middle forecast is my baseline, the blue line. The red is what I get from using the OECD numbers. Okay, so you can immediately see that the OECD numbers for India are more pessimistic than my baseline. And then I give a slight optimistic one, green, to just give some variation. And I do these projections, but I'm going to show you next. So the middle one, let me say, is based on is the per capita GDP projection, which is 5.4%, which is roughly average 6% GDP growth. Okay, 6%, not 6.5, not 7, and it's roughly 7% for this decade, 6.5 next decade, and 5% the third decade. Okay, and what does it show? Next. So as I said, I apply this to all the countries. The green line is the EU, the blue line is China, the red line is India, and then we have I don't know if you can see, the pink one is Russia, the brownish one, which is kind of flat, is Japan. So let me start at the bottom. Look at where the Indian line is beginning to cross. So basically, sorry, one more point here. What I do is I have an index of what I call economic power. And the reason why I do this, because I want to base everything on the real numbers, right? So my index of economic power is based on the per capita GDP and the GDP PPP. Okay, so this is not directly comparable to the ratios you will see there, but the history shows that within a year or two, whatever dollar values, etc., you see matches this. Okay, so please remember, it's not an exact translation into US GDP numbers, but it is roughly equal. But I feel more confident about these numbers than about current price, etc. When we are talking about 20, 30 years, I don't know, frankly, as an economist, what will happen. It can be anything. But this I'm pretty confident about. So here we have, so if you look at the bottom, basically India's economic power in my now latest calculation, we overtook Russia last year, we'll overtake Japan this year and Germany next year in terms of these economic power calculation. UK was 2-3 years ago. Okay, that's the first point. Okay, the interesting thing, just as an aside, I just read a tweet 2 days ago on President Putin. I was quite surprised actually. This our foreign policy people should take note. He said Russia is the fourth power. Manjeet may want to comment on it later. Behind US, China, and India. Actually, that's exactly what this thing shows. That it will be true from next year, next year or the year after. So that's interesting. So I took that as an endorsement. Okay, now let's go up there. Now, the blue line is China. Okay, a lot of research has been done recently, which shows that, and this is solid research, it's not just OECD, which shows that China's growth rate will go down to roughly 2.8%. So that is inside this thing, not my own projection, but the OECD. The EU is there. So the interesting part here is, let's conclude. You see the red line, which I've told you the bottom. On the top, we will overtake by 2050. We will have overtaken the EU in terms of economic power and be within a shouting range of China. Again, please don't take the exact number seriously. I'm talking about the trend, a closing of gaps, and so on. So finally, in terms of India's GDP, so these appear very precise, but they are not supposed to be precise. They are supposed to give you a trend of where the world economy is headed. Okay, there could be shocks which affect every country, in which case everything will. That's why these are all ratios. So actually, if things affect everybody, these will not change. But if it is differential impacts, it will change. Okay, that is. I have not taken account of those. We economists make different projections, which I said, which are easy. So these numbers will, as I say in the last line, if we think of GDP in current US dollars, this will happen, maybe 2-3 years later than the dates which I have given you. Next. Okay, so the same thing, I've already given you an indication. So the same process we can follow with international and say, okay, take every social indicator. Let's say life expectancy I've shown here. One can say, okay, where are we? It turns out here we are worse than where we should be. And so we have a big challenge to go up in the next 7 years, 10 years, 25 years. Next. So, conclusion, we are well placed to become a UMIC, HIC. The numbers which I get are not as difficult as everybody else seems to think. So let me warn you, please do not take these at face value. You can dispute them. There are people who are saying we need 7%, 8%, I don't know, 9% growth for the next 30 years. My numbers do not support that. Okay, we don't need 9%. The problem is that the history of growth shows that after you accelerate growth, the most difficult problem is sustaining it. Every shock tends to derail you. You look at the history of South Korea, you look at any country, Thailand, they get a shock and it goes down. The tough thing is to get it back to that level, not to keep raising it. This is something which I have been trying to convey for the last 20 years, but people unfortunately do not understand this. The history is not of people continuing to raise their growth. It is not possible. Okay? The big thing about China is it was able to maintain a growth rate of 9% for 30 years. It is not that it kept raising it. It's the sustaining. They got shocks. They got knocked off, but they went back. That's what the history of growth tells you. New opportunities must be grabbed. Digital was mentioned. You are absolutely right. Digital is going to be a big thing in India. What I actually call, that term is not mine. I call it hybrid, but the term is phygital. And India is going to be a pioneer in systems, I believe, and we must ensure it is. All the Indians here, but you can perhaps think of the Nepalese side also. Will be, remember, go back to the demographics, okay? The world will move to robotics. We don't need to. Okay, this is another thing which I'm trying to convey to everybody. We have the manpower. We should be the manpower supplier of the world. Either here, sitting here, and some going there. Obviously, some things will remain. I mean, if you need a nurse, she has to be sitting next to you. You have to be physically there, right? If you are a carpenter or construction worker, you have to be there. There's no way to do it from here, unless through robots. So that is the big change, the demographic, the demonopolization, which means basically shifting of supply chains. Okay, and if my vision comes true, a lot of those should shift to India. So there will be opportunities for all our neighbors, because these will be FDI, foreign supply chains, okay, most of them. Afterwards, of course, Indian will develop, but in the next 10, 15 years, it will be FDI, okay. That doesn't mean Indian companies will not be involved, or other companies, from Sri Lanka or Nepal can be involved. And finally, the old challenges, the basic thing which I have worried about for the last 2 years is the quality of basic education and the skilling. The skilling is very poor in India. We are way behind on skilling. Okay. I don't know enough about Nepal. Maybe you can explore, people here will explore, but if that is a problem, please focus on it. That's my only advice to Nepal. Skilling is critical, and skilling at every level. Don't just think of the high level. Okay? Thank you.
This kind of seminar, particularly relating to Nepal Center for Contemporary Studies, its own background. And now it has become a part of Kathmandu University. First, we ran this center for 25 years, but we could not do it better. And we thought that we have to now integrate into the university system, and that is how the Nepal Center for Contemporary Study has become a part of Kathmandu University. Before I take your time, I don't like to bore you by talking much about the whole program. I'll be talking later on. There are very brilliant speakers. I think I was really enlightened by Madam Foreign Ministers, Dr. Rana and Achyut Wagle ji, and the last speaker, Mr. Arvind Virmani ji, and you are in detail. As a political science student, I could grasp a little, but still I could understand, I could grasp whatever I saw on the chart, etc. And now I'd like to thank the honorable ministers for sparing her time, because she was traveling all over Europe, and now she could come and stay and spend her time here in New Delhi. We hardly meet in Kathmandu, but sometimes we meet here and there. And Dr. Arvind Virmani, you are brilliant. I think she has presented a brilliant paper. I think it could have some kind of guidelines for the futures. And I like to thank Dr. Arvind Virmani ji, member of the NITI Aayog, for presentation. And Ambassador Bhutan, heads of His Excellency Namgyal. Dr. Achyut Wagle, he also spoke very well on the subject, and from Nepalese perspective. And Dr. Ashok Vishandass, former chairman of the Commission of the Agricultural Cost and Prices. Dr. Ratan Chand, former director, Egrow. Dr. Salini Singh, Egrow. Dr. Surendra Thapa, because I have been given this list to to present. Otherwise I could not remember the names. And Dr. Surendra Thapa of the Nepal Embassy, and representatives of Kathmandu University, of course, we are a part of it, and of course the representatives of the organizers at Egrow. I thank you all for your patient listening, and now I think I have nothing to add. Just to hand over the mic to the organizer.
So before we finish, to honor the dignitaries, and for that I invite Colonel Mahendrapal Singh to present the gifts. Professor Wagle. Professor Baral.